Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to Season 3 of the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Season 3, here we come. Episode 1 is entitled The Search, Part 1. It aired September 26th, 1994. Before we get going, anything to correct from the previous episode, which was Season 2 wrap-up?
No, it was perfect.
Yeah, I thought everything about that one was pretty good. We got our point across.
I think so. Hopefully we got some more listeners.
Oh yeah, let's hope so. I hope we pick up some listeners for Season 3, as I know people are more interested from here than they were in Seasons 1 and 2.
That is true.
Well, are you ready to get started?
I am raring to go. I am ready to get into Season 3 and start giving everybody my unsolicited opinions.
Okay.
Well, in theory, they wouldn't be unsolicited because they're actually listening to the podcast.
That's true. If they downloaded it, it's kind of solicited.
Yeah, it's their own fault.
Oh my gosh. That's true. It is their own fault.
Thanks for listening, though.
Yeah. So we get a last time on. That's all from the final episode of Season 2 when we were on the ill-fated camping trip and we met the nasty Jem'Hadar. We see the destruction of the Odyssey, and we also see when we realize that the woman they rescued was not really a victim, but the pawn of the Founders, whoever they are. If
they really exist.
I feel like they do exist.
Well, it would be pretty dull if they didn't.
Well, I mean, let's keep going because I don't want to say something stupid here, and I'll say it later. I'll say what I was going to say later.
Okay, you can say something stupid later. That's fine.
I can say something stupid, I guess, technically anytime.
Well, yeah.
All right, well, let's get going.
Absolutely.
In the cold open, we're in ops, and Kira is telling the team about Jem'Hadar attack simulations, and the news is not good. They'll be overrun quickly by the superior firepower of the Jem'Hadar. Cisco isn't here, by the way, and the team is throwing around terrible ideas like collapsing the wormhole or abandoning the station and defending from Bajor.
Kira goes right back to her roots. Guerrilla tactics. Hide in the conduits.
Yep.
Plant bombs, booby traps, all that kind of thing.
Yes, and I don't know what that was actually going to get them. I'm not even really sure that they know what the Jem'Hadar would want with them. Like, why would they? Were they just going to come to attack to take over because they want to own the Alpha Quadrant? I don't know.
I think her plan was that they could hold out until help would arrive from Bajor.
Well, I'm not sure what makes them think Bajor could help when a Galaxy-class starship up against the Jem'Hadar was almost no match.
Yeah, that can beam through their shields, can walk through their containment fields. Yeah, doesn't look good for them.
So that's what I mean. I think all the ideas were just bad. Maybe abandon everything.
Run away.
Was the right answer. Run away, exactly.
Although Odo does point out that if they did all that, there probably wouldn't be much of a station left.
Yeah, and he's right. Well, sensors pick up an energy surge, and Kira calls for red alert as a ship decloaks. But good news, it's actually Cisco, and he says he's brought back a little surprise for the Dominion. And we get our first look at the Defiant, a Federation ship that cloaks.
Yay, that was awesome.
I didn't remember it cloaking. In fact, all I really remember about it is Worf preparing to ram it into the Borg cube in First Contact, and Riker calling it little. That's all I remember about the Defiant.
My favorite Star Trek scene of all the movies. Ramming speed.
Yes.
Oh, I was actually a little giddy here. It's the first time we see the Defiant, which is, as you know, my favorite Star Trek ship of all time. Voyager was pretty cool looking, but Defiant, it's just the ship.
At this point, we cue the theme song, and we have a pretty short and sweet cold open.
I'm going to bring something up here.
Oh, I have a lot to say here.
In that case, maybe you should go first.
Okay, well, let's start with Jedzya's hair. This is a travesty.
The hair is so distracting.
There's so much of it. Where did this come from? It's all piled up on the back of her head, like in a weird shape. It's too much. It's not good.
I think she borrowed the style from the flaky skinned people.
Oh, maybe, except rather than having it kind of come out to the side, she just went straight to the back, almost like a fin.
Yeah.
It's so distracting. She might tip over backwards if she leans too far to the back. But then we have a new high collar on Odo's uniform, where it used to be kind of an open, stretchy t-shirt-like collar before, but no more. And he's also got this new sort of belt across it, so he's been shaping himself into some uniform upgrades.
Absolutely. He's been practicing.
Pretty sure in the crossover episode from last season, which was the mirror one, I said a higher collar suits him, so I'm glad to see that he figured that out too.
He looks pretty good.
Also, Kira's outfit here looks the same, but somehow the colors are deeper red than previously. I don't know if it's because the broadcast was a higher quality at this point, or if it was an actual change to the costume. But all of the costumes look like they've been upgraded in some way.
Yeah.
What did you have to say?
Well, the thing I'm going to bring up is, so they have a Romulan cloak on the Defiant, yet the sensors on Deep Space Nine managed to pick it up. And Kira called for red alert. Now, given that they are in a heightened state of alert, isn't this extremely dangerous for Cisco to do? How didn't he know Kira's first reaction, giving her past history, wouldn't be open fire with everything on where the disturbance is?
Yeah, that's probably true.
It's a bad time to play a prank.
I was just going to say this is not a great time to sneak up on them.
Yeah, exactly. It makes a better opening.
Well, yeah, he did it for the drama. After the ad break, everyone is looking at schematics for the Defiant, and Cisco is telling them it's officially classed as an escort vessel, but unofficially it's a warship. Starfleet had started to work on a way to defeat the Borg, and this particular ship is not intended for families, there's no science lab on board, it's just battle ready. It's a prototype, and because of some design flaws, and also the Borg threat seeming less urgent, they backed off developing. I have to say, thinking that the Borg weren't a threat anymore at this point was quite a mistake. But okay, people, whatever. Out of sight, out of mind, right? Come on.
It's a few years before Voyager and First Contact, but the Borg are still a huge threat.
Yeah, it just seems weird to me that, they thought the Borg threat was less urgent because they weren't right in their face. If you wait until they're right in your face, you're all dead.
Well, that does seem to be the case.
Yeah, it's strange.
Remember Wolf 359?
Mm-hmm. Cisco tells them the Defiant is apparently so overpowered that it can blow itself apart, which really irritates Kira because she's like, this is what they sent us for help?
Miles does seem kind of interested in the schematics. I mean, he's already excited about getting to work on it.
He's always interested in new stuff that he has to fix. Cisco points out that the intent isn't to use the ship to fight off a Dominion attack. Instead, the mission is to take it into the Gamma Quadrant and find the Founders and convince them the Federation is not a threat, which is a funny message to deliver in a threatening warship.
This is very Star Trek-y, though. This is really going to almost a TNG kind of approach. What they want to do is find the enemy and just talk to them, because I'm sure they can reason with them. They could negotiate a treaty, maybe even one as crappy as the treaty with the Cardassians, and everybody would be happy.
Yeah, it's like they just want to talk them into, I don't know, being friends or recognizing that they're not trying to take over their territory.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, they did establish a colony in that quadrant. So I would say that words might be tough at this point.
Yeah. Plus, why wouldn't they send Picard for that? He's really good at that kind of thing.
Well, that's true, but they already blew up a starship like his.
Maybe they want to go a little bit more low-key, right?
Yeah. In comes a Starfleet security dude and a Romulan named Sub-Commander Torul.
Wow, she has really shiny hair.
She does.
Is that some kind of plastic cap? Because her hair was perfectly set and kind of glistening.
Yeah, it was very shiny. Apparently, the Romulans have loaned them a cloaking device, and Sub-Commander Torul is there to protect it, and not to make friends, as she says something snippy and leaves.
Although, not a visitor. That response when she says charming about the Romulan.
Yeah.
That was like a whole head and eye roll. Very impressive.
Definitely. But Lieutenant Commander Eddington says he is there to make friends. And I don't like him right away. He's too chummy. He's like really close to Kira and shakes her hand and he stands very close. It creeps me out. Odo asks what his function is because Odo is always very threatened by Starfleet personnel with security uniforms. I don't know why he's always threatened by everyone, but he is. He's one of those people who's so focused on his title and what authority is assigned to him that he can't see anything else. Well, Cisco says there will be a briefing later, and he tells everyone to be ready to depart at 0700 tomorrow morning for an early morning road trip.
Did you notice Eddington didn't actually say anything to Odo? He introduced himself to Kira, and then he didn't really interact. He just sort of stood and looked him up and down, and Odo was the one who started talking to him.
Well, I think as we find in this episode, Starfleet Command is suspicious of Odo.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the briefing he got.
Oh, that's a good point.
Well, everyone but Odo leaves. Instead, he has to throw a little temper tantrum, and then he stomps out. So Cisco runs after him to say that he's still in charge of all non-Starfleet security matters aboard the station, but he'll have to consult with Eddington for Starfleet matters. Odo continues to whine about this as he doesn't want to report to Eddington. Cisco says he fought for him, but the decision ultimately wasn't his to make. Odo then whines about how they wouldn't have had the security incidents on the station if he was allowed to do what he wants instead of being handcuffed by regulations. And Cisco points out that his resistance to regulations is part of the issue Starfleet has with him. Odo figures it's because he's a shapeshifter, which Cisco bristles at. He says it's not a racial issue. Although I think Odo would qualify as a different species, not a race, as I don't think he could actually produce offsprings with humans. But I guess I'm not sure that we've attempted that, and I hope we don't. I don't want to know.
Species.
But anyway, he says he's going to resign, and he stomps away again. Odo's face also looks a little different, not just his outfit in this scene. I'm not sure what the tweaks are to the makeup.
The makeup appears to be more matte. There's a lot less shine in his face.
It's definitely a different look for him. It's very distracting that they keep changing it. Even if they weren't happy with it in one way, I almost just wish they'd leave it alone.
Yeah, you do notice it. In this scene, I'm kind of torn about Odo. He does seem to be coming across as almost like one of those whiny employees who, like you say, is obsessed about their title. But at the same time, he is pretty good at what he does, given that there are the restrictions. I feel Starfleet may have been using him as a convenient way to blame someone for their terrible security. Odo isn't running the station. Therefore, he isn't ultimately in charge of all the security. He can be overridden by Cisco and I assume Kira as well in the chain of command. So I think there might be a little bit of Starfleet-esque blame shifting here.
Maybe. I take his point that if he were given a little bit more leeway, he would be able to secure that station. It really is very insecure, as we have discussed many, many times.
Right.
And you don't have to lock the place down like a prison to improve security. There are just some basic things they could allow him to do.
Right.
I mean, even allowing surveillance in the public spaces, right? If he put cameras up on the promenade, think of how many crimes we would have caught before they happened.
Yes, put a camera behind the grates, as you point out.
Put cameras pointing at the public spaces. I mean, it's just like putting surveillance cameras outside at a strip mall. I mean, it's the public space. It's not like we're invading anybody's privacy. I know Odo would want to do more than that, but you could at least let him do some of those things. He wants surveillance in all the quarters. He wants to know exactly what everybody's doing all the time. And that's maybe one step too far. But still, he could have had a little more leeway.
Right. I would agree with your summary, but he gets very defensive when his competency is challenged.
I've definitely worked with those people who were very concerned about their title and the person they reported to. And I've never really understood that. It's just like, just contribute what you want to contribute. What difference does it make what your title is? What difference does it make to Odo? But I guess it's important to him.
Right.
Maybe because he still has such an identity crisis.
Oh, yes. I think that's it. Exactly.
Well, now we go to Cisco's quarters, and what can only be described as a full-grown Jake has appeared.
Yeah, who's the guy in Cisco's quarters?
He must be, 16 or 17 as an actor at this point. I'm not sure what age the character is supposed to be. But he's a big dude, except he's still got a very high-pitched, childlike voice. Well, Jake is eating spiced pudding and enjoying it, and for some reason he couldn't get it on their trip back to Earth. And also he's wearing this weird, silky blue and purple long-sleeve t-shirt with these, like, orange pants. This is not an outfit I would want to repeat. It was not good.
Oh, yeah. We need to talk about what the hell is he wearing.
Yeah, it looked like silk pajamas. That's what it looked like. It was not good.
When they do the close-up, I thought it looked like something from, like, Pippi Longstocking.
What?
Well, it had some, like, weird patterns on the front.
Yeah.
It was so strange.
No, it was very strange. I agree. But anyway, they talk about Deep Space Nine feeling like home, and Jake points out that his dad brought back some of his treasured belongings to make the place feel even more like home.
I like this scene because it was something I could really relate to. That point where it goes from it's just somewhere that you live to the place where you are is now home. It's showing a change here that to him and Jake, this is now what they think of as home. I do like how he called it this Cardassian monstrosity. I feel that's a little unfair. It's a beautiful piece of Cardassian architecture.
No, it's a good description. I find it a little bit peculiar, though, the timing of this, because I think if the station were under threat from the Dominion at this point, this is exactly when I would not start decorating the place with my valuable personal belongings. But also, I'm not sure I would bring my kid there with this imminent threat. I don't know, so I guess you're not supposed to think about it too much. Part of you is like supposed to see that it is now their home. Isn't that nice? But the other part is like, well, they're under this direct threat now from an alien race that they don't know a lot about, but they do know that they're dangerous. And they also know that they've made threats against them. So it just seems like a funny time to all of a sudden go, oh yeah, this is home now. And to bring all my stuff and hang it on the walls.
But I think that might be trying to tell the story that Cisco is now feeling that his home is actually threatened. And this is what they're showing here.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. All right. Well, now Odo is pouting on the second floor of the promenade, and he's looking out the window. I was thinking he could just work on helping them survive.
Yeah, they are under threat. That would be quite considerate.
I mean, Starfleet is clearly scared of this new threat after having one of their Galaxy-class ships destroyed so easily. And
yeah.
Odo can just be so selfish sometimes, and I find him really hard to like in those kinds of situations.
Mm-hmm.
I do recognize that at this point in the story, they're doing that on purpose because he's really struggling to find out who he is and to feel like there's a place for him to belong.
Yeah.
And he felt like he had a place when he had the head of security title and he knew his role. As soon as things get a little cloudy, he always just kind of falls apart and he reverts to this angry, hostile, snippy Odo. And I have to say, I find him really unlikable in that scenario.
I think it's because, like you say, it's that loss of stability.
Yeah, and he gets even jerkier as we go here. But Kira appears and tells him that the provisional government drink. There's our first mention in episode 1.
First drink of the season.
Anyway, she says they want Odo to go along on the mission, but Odo doubts this story and says, oh, it's more likely that you want me to go along. She says you're still needed here no matter what some idiot Starfleet admiral thinks.
And once again, we see all admirals at Starfleet are evil.
Yeah, I don't think they're all evil, but I do think many of them are jerks. Now in Cisco's office, Cisco wants Quark to come along on this road trip as well. It's like a big camper trip, that everybody piles into the giant camper. Because Quark helped establish a trade agreement with one of the members of the Dominion, Cisco thinks he might be of help on this trip, which seems like quite a stretch, I have to say. And Quark doesn't want to go, but Cisco spoke to the Grand Nagus, and he agreed that Quark is the Ferengi for the job, and he has the Grand Nagus' scepter as evidence, so Quark relents, but he's not happy about it.
The Grand Nagus really does like to pick on Quark.
He does. Cisco picks on him a little bit too, and he gets him to kiss the scepter, and he basically guilts him into it.
The grin on his face when the scene closes, that was priceless. It was like Cisco thoroughly enjoyed that.
I don't know why he likes to bring the fear out of Quark, but he definitely does.
And Quark's squirming to try and get out of it.
Yeah, he tries to send Rom along. He's just like, Rom only has a son to worry about. I have a whole business to worry about.
Yes.
Oh, that was mean.
Now, I wonder about that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that really is a Ferengi value there? This isn't just Quark just squirming to get out of it. If you're looking at business or family, it's like, my brother could be killed and he has a son, but that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Their value is on the business, not on the people.
Maybe. But also, I think Quark is just kind of a giant coward. And he always throws Rom under the bus. It's like his natural instinct.
Yeah.
Can you imagine Rom? He would have not helped on this journey.
He would have found somewhere quiet to hide and stayed there.
That's right. Well, now Dax enters Cisco's office and says Miles has inspected the Defiant and he has a long list of things to fix, but says it'll be ready to go in the morning.
I was looking at that map Cisco was studying and it said Dominion Influence, but I couldn't read any of the names on there. There was a lot of text on that screen.
Yeah.
If it had been filmed in high def or converted in high def, it would have been really useful. I bet there would have been some great names on there.
Yeah, I couldn't make anything out. Well, then they talk about how Cisco volunteered for this mission because he'd rather not wait around for an invasion. His passion for the mission was ignited by visiting Starfleet headquarters and realizing that he'd rather be part of things than sitting in a tower making decisions like the other admirals. Dax finds this funny because Curzon always found it odd that Cisco had designs on becoming an admiral. He viewed him more as an implementer than a decision maker.
I love this Cisco. He's just full of fire and defiance.
Is that why his ship is named the Defiant?
I don't know, actually. Dax pointed out in the scene, he's very passionate about this. This is something that's important.
Yeah, it was something that Dax pointed out where she was happy to see him passionate about something. Like It was the first time she had seen this side of him since his wife died. So this is maybe more the version of Cisco that Curzon saw.
Another thing is, I think it follows a similar theme to the movie Generations, which I think comes out right after this, where Kirk, talking to Picard, and I'm paraphrasing here, tells him, don't let them take it away from you. Don't let them promote you. Because when you're in the captain's seat, you can make a difference. This is following that kind of advice. When you're the person in the action, you can make more of a difference than somebody sitting back at Starfleet headquarters in paradise making proclamations.
Absolutely. Although I have to say that especially if you spent a lot of time in a place like Deep Space Nine, where you didn't have a lot of control over anything, and now with all the stuff going on with the Cardassian Treaty, there's got to be an element of sitting in paradise that seems pretty good. But I take the point that Cisco is more of a doer, and that was what Dax was trying to tell him, that's what Curzon saw in him, that he was more of a doer, and it was good to see that having something to do was bringing him back to life, which I'm sure is something that would take anybody a long time to do after losing a spouse so unexpectedly and so early.
Also, we learned something more about Curzon, that he would never volunteer for anything. So now we have a drunk gambler with low morals who also would shirk his responsibilities.
Yeah, the hits keep on coming for Curzon.
Yeah, he's winner.
Quite a guy. Well, now we go to the bridge of the Defiant, and Bashir is complaining about there not being any medical info in the computer or any place to treat patients. But he does have a chair on the bridge, so, sit down and get to work.
Yeah.
Dehex relays Quark's profound disappointment in his quarters, which was funny. Before they take off, Odo calls and asks for permission to join the mission at the request of the Bajoran Provisional Government. Drink! Kira and Cisco share a little smile as he's accepted on board, and then we set off in our shiny new ship with a Romulan on the bridge.
I just love this. So many shots of the Defiant.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, they head into the wormhole and cloak as soon as they hit the Gamma Quadrant, and everything on the bridge goes so dark when they cloak. I guess they have to turn the lights off?
That could actually be one of the issues, that someone accidentally connected the dimmer switch to the cloaking device.
Maybe. The lights go off, yeah.
Add that to the list of things to fix, Miles.
That's probably on his list. But they set course for the Karema system, which I don't think is how they pronounced it back when we first heard about them, but Karema is now how Cisco says it. Well, Odo finds he has to share quarters with Quark, because not all of the quarters are available. I thought he was going to put his bucket on the top bunk because Quark was on the bottom bunk, which would have been very funny. But instead, he just put it in the corner. Quark has a million questions for him, but Odo needs to get into his bucket, and he'd prefer to do it without Quark looking at him. He even growls at Quark to get him to look away, and then he puts himself in his bucket. He is just so cranky.
Well, you can see something else is wrong here.
Yeah.
You've never seen him just outright threatening as he was in this scene.
Yeah. Remember in that episode, The Alternate, where there was that thought that maybe he was dangerous?
Uh-huh.
And they knew that he was that creature, but the creature itself hadn't done anything particularly terrible. But Cisco was ready to shoot to kill. And I just thought, well, how peculiar. But then when you start to see him like this, where he's so aggressive and he's kind of scary, you start to realize that they can't control him at all. He is very powerful. He can do things that none of them can do. They don't have any idea really how to kill him or restrain him if they had to. They have no ability to do that.
You give a blaster to Bashir.
Yeah, but I still stand by. That didn't do it. I think he just flew into a bunch of pieces of goo and then sucked himself back together. I feel confident if we go back to the Mirror Universe, Odo will have put himself back together and be walking with a limp.
Mirror Universe Odo is dead. Move on.
Okay. Well, Miles reports that 2 Jem'Hadar warships are heading toward them. They go to red alert, but are hoping the cloaking device keeps them hidden. The ships fly by them, but then change course and double back. Cisco prepares to decloak, but the Romulan says a cloaked ship at warp radiates a slight subspace variance. She says if they drop out of warp, the variance will be eliminated. So they stop, and then the cockroach-like warships return. That's what those Jem'Hadar warships look like to me. They look like cockroaches.
Oh, yeah. Totally. Yeah, Miles says they weren't aware of that subspace variance.
Yeah, well, it's not something they advertise.
I find the Romulans funny. They're on this mission. Obviously, it's important enough to the Romulan space empire to send a representative and loan them a cloak.
Sure.
And even then, they're keeping things from the Federation that could seriously impact the mission. Like, our cloak isn't actually that good.
Well, in kind of a similar fashion to when Cisco and Dukat were on that runabout and Cisco was like locking him out of everything. It was kind of similar to that.
But I don't think Cisco, if he'd been ordered to cooperate, would be holding back critical information.
No. I'm sure she is doing what she was ordered to do.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the cockroach-like warships return. They start sweeping the area with an anti-proton scan. They power down all of the systems on the Defiant and wait in the dark to see what happens. And eventually, the Jem'Hadar ships break off their scans and leave. Then they arrive at the Karema homeworld and have open talks to try and find the founders. The Karema dude is nosing around the Defiant bridge. He's not interested in any deal, and besides, he doesn't know anything about the founders. He only knows about the Vorta, and you do what the Vorta says, or they send in the Jem'Hadar to kill you. But they strong-arm the guy into helping them, and he's, really peculiar looking with a tall, narrow forehead. It's very strange.
The way he was moving and looking at things, it made me think of a chicken.
Of a chicken?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. He was kind of clucking his way around the bridge, yeah.
Yeah, sort of hunting and pecking.
Yeah, hunting and pecking, exactly. I can see that. Well, he shows them the Kalanon system where the Dominion maintains an unmanned subspace relay that takes all communications. And Odo is suddenly very interested in what's on the screen, and he asks what a little shadowy area is. The Karema dude says it's the Omarian Nebula. And the dramatic music really swells as Odo looks at the screen, and it's all very mysterious. But only he seems to be involved in that moment. Nobody else notices his interest or obviously hears the music. But
yeah, you know something's up because he's just standing staring at it.
And they zoom in on him, and yeah, it was very dramatic. Well, they have what they need from the forehead guy, and Quark asks if he can stay behind there. He doesn't want to go along on the rest of the mission. He says he'll find his way back to the station. Cisco agrees, and they wish each other good luck.
Well, I also think this could be because he doesn't want to share quarters with a mega grumpy possible serial killer.
Well, Quark doesn't like to be afraid, and I'm sure he's afraid on this mission. I would be afraid if I were him.
Well, and that's just bunking with Odo.
Well, that's true. Well, they lay in a course for the Kalanon system.
It seems to be an interesting style of governance here. The founders, or the Dominion, seems to be very hands-off, certainly at least with this race. They just send them orders and expect them to do it.
I'm very unclear at this point about who this all is, like who the Dominion is. I don't know what that means, so I'm still waiting for kind of an explanation of the whole thing. So it's a little foggy, but it just sounds like the way that communication happens is they just send communication to this relay station, and then magically things happen.
The Vorta tell them to do stuff.
Whoever needs to get the message gets the message. Kira drops by Cisco's tiny quarters to talk about Odo. They're both worried about him, but they don't know what to do about it. Kira can't believe Starfleet would do this to Odo, but Cisco says they've been pressing him to replace Odo for 2 years because he's not a team player, and he doesn't respect the chain of command.
Starfleet likes team players.
Yeah, and the chain of command. Well, Odo doesn't respect the chain of command, and he's just not Starfleet at all. Kira wants to know what will happen when the mission is over. He tells her he wants Odo to stay, but he really has to want to stay. Then the Romulan calls saying they've reached the Kalanon system, and they head back to the bridge.
So Starfleet likes team players, even if that's potentially negative to the mission. I think the problem is they don't really understand the situation. This is another case of that. It's easy to make rules and issue edicts when you live in paradise.
Well,
they're not on the ground, if you like. They're not in the real world. It's Odo that works out in the boonies, out in this area of space. And Kira's comment, I think, of he gets the job done should really, if anything, be the most important part of this equation.
But it's not always the most important part of the equation. When you're talking about the safety of the people on your teams, that's not always the most important thing, especially if you look at it from Starfleet's perspective, where they are a long ways away. They have a person who is in control of security of their people who they don't know. In fact, he's not even a person. They don't know anything about him. He's quite a mystery. He used to work for the Cardassians, and Kira does say that. Right. He doesn't know where he comes from himself. He couldn't even tell you. And he's had no formal training. They have no way of knowing if he would put human life first. So if I looked at it from a distance like that, especially with all the stuff going on with the Maquis and things that I already wasn't prepared for, now I'm looking at, okay, I've got this station that's at this very critical part of the quadrant where it is at the mouth of this wormhole. I have some very vulnerable people there, but if something happens to them or I don't know what's happening to them, I'm potentially putting all of Starfleet at risk at this point. So I can see that that's a very critical position and they have no control over that guy. So I get it. I also get that people on the ground know the reality, but he is such an unknown that I get their fear.
Okay. My point is we have somebody here who is 2 weeks travel away on the other side, living in paradise, making edicts about how the world should work when we've already had demonstrated they have no idea of the reality. And they are working entirely from, this is how it should work. This is what the instruction manual says. Liken it to following one of those really rigid design methodologies that we all know never work. And meanwhile, you've got somebody on the ground like Odo who understands the practicalities from it, knows the sector, knows the people, knows how it works. And you're saying he's less important because my rules and my official way of doing it is better.
It's not that he's less important.
Yeah.
The problem is he's a wild card. He goes by his own sense of justice, which is very important to him. But his sense of justice is just that. It's his sense of justice. So he is a wild card in the middle of the structure that you have tried to create. I get that you're a long ways from it. But remember when they threw frowny-faced Primin into it? And there was like that whole big mess, but they eventually learned to work together because they didn't try to change Odo. Instead, they just sort of gave him a person who at first didn't get along with him, but eventually he saw he was competent, and then that kind of worked. But then Primin disappeared because whatever, he wasn't part of the cast, you know. But I can see where that kind of thing would actually work. But throwing a person in at this point is risky unless it's a person that is going to report to Odo or, you know, or they're going to do something. But all I'm saying is I get the fear that's coming from Starfleet in this scenario.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
I see what you're saying. And I counter that with, I think that they're working entirely on a theoretical principle of this is how it should work.
Of course.
While ignoring the realities.
So I have a whole thing about this in my wrap-up notes at the end, where I feel like Cisco has failed in this area, not Starfleet.
Well, let's leave that for overanalysis.
All right. It's my leadership section at the end.
To our listeners, we've got another 20 minutes of us talking about this.
It's possible.
Back to the show.
Well, the Defiant is cloaked, and we're in orbit around the planet, housing the subspace relay. They have to decloak for 6 seconds so that Dax and O'Brien can beam down to this unmanned station. And down on the planet, the two of them are in the central computer room and trying to break into the computer. They get in very easily and start searching for info on the Founders.
Do you think they really got into the system?
Yeah.
I have my doubts. Miles is somewhat suspicious.
Well, I guess I thought he did because they got the location, essentially, of the Founders, right? They did get that location, didn't they?
Well, they got a location.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Since Miles thought it was too easy, it was pretty suspicious.
Yeah. At the same time, I'm wondering whether the Dominion were just a little complacent, taking the attitude of who would dare access our stuff.
Yeah, that kind of seems counter to what's going on with the rest of the story, so it probably was a trap.
Yeah.
Back on the Defiant, Cisco is complaining about the replicators making him bad coffee or something. But Dax calls, she's already saying they found something. 80% of all outgoing traffic is going to one location. It's either a relay station or a command center. They send the coordinates of the location to the ship just as an alarm blares, and it seems like someone grabs Dax from behind, but the scene ended really quickly. 3 Jem'Hadar warships are headed toward the Defiant. Cisco wants to fire on the location where Dax and Miles are to try to get them out, but they'd have to decloak again. The Romulan says, let's just get out of here. We have what we wanted. We can leave 2 expendable crew members behind, which does not sit well with Bashir. Cisco sits in the captain's chair and says to set course for the coordinates Dax sent, and they take off at warp 7. Leaving the 2 expendable crew members behind.
He's leaving them behind. That's kind of brutal. I also think we have an encapsulation of Romulan thinking here. Expendable crew members.
Right. Man, when your team is that small, nobody's really expendable. That seems high risk.
Now, there's another possible explanation here, and I think it would be following Federation logic. So they've left Dax and Miles behind, and they're going to be captured. Perhaps Dax would be able to reason with them, because of her background as a diplomat. So maybe there's an aspect of this of, look, I'm sure Dax will be fine because we'll probably find out later she found the Founders, she negotiated a peace treaty, everything's great. So it wasn't just simply a case of abandoning them. It was leaving them behind knowing that there's a good chance Dax could look after herself.
Yeah, I think Cisco kind of hints at that in the next scene, although we've seen no real evidence that Dax has any kind of negotiating skills. We know that was Curzon, but Curzon with Klingons because he knew a lot about Klingons and related to them well. I don't know how he would do with a race that he's never encountered before.
But that steely-faced Cisco, as he says, engage.
Yes.
Great stuff.
Well, Bashir wonders what will happen to Dax and Miles, and Cisco says they'll probably be interrogated. He calls Odo for help, but Odo brushes him off. And Kira says she'll go talk to him. The Romulan says Jem'Hadar ships are approaching, but there's no sign they've been detected. They drop out of warp and cut main power like before to let the ships fly by.
Well, we know something is now really up with Odo.
Yeah.
This is more than just sulking.
Yeah, but he resigned, so he doesn't really report to Cisco anymore.
He is the representative of the Bajoran government, so...
Yeah, and he's being jerky.
I would think he would take his responsibilities seriously.
Yeah, well, apparently not. Kira enters Odo's quarters, and he's looking at the map of the nebula again. Kira tells him to stop brooding and start talking. But he's so cranky. I mean, right? He's so unlikable. This is just such a terrible version of him. Yeah, very jerky.
This is not really a version of him that we've seen.
No. He wants to take a shuttlecraft and go to the Omarian Nebula. Kira asks why, but he doesn't know. He's just drawn there, like he's being pulled by some instinct.
Odo seems really agitated here, like he's about to explode.
Yeah, I would equate it to somebody who's in physical pain all the time. You do tend to get very testy.
Yeah, it's like that. And he snaps at Kira as well. He seems like he's very much in distress.
He definitely is. I don't know what else to say, because, yeah, he's being a jerk.
But he says as soon as he entered the Gamma Quadrant, he started to feel this.
But he's been there before, so what's different?
Good point.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. It's like, well, why didn't he get drawn here before? Why this time? Are they sending out some kind of signals because they've learned about him since the Vorta was on the station? That's my guess.
That's a good theory.
Yeah. Well, he says he has to leave now. He can't wait. But as Kira is arguing with him, the ship takes some kind of weapons hit. And the cockroach ships have apparently found a way to see them.
Turns out the cloak isn't that great after all.
They drop the cloak and raise shields as they are under very heavy fire.
Observation here.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't they get a hold of that old Klingon technology that Chang had on his warbird, where he could fire when cloaked?
Yeah.
Surely somebody had held on to the plans.
Yeah, you would think so. Well, the Jem'Hadar do serious damage to this warship very quickly as the bridge is full of smoke and the starboard power coupling is destroyed. They take another hit and things are going very badly as everyone is flying all over the place. A red shirt NPC gets killed very quickly. Finally, the Defiant gets a couple of shots off and blows up one of the cockroach ships.
Score 1 for the Defiant.
Right. Bashir takes the helm as Odo helps Kira out from under some fallen beams, because we've always got beams on any ship.
Fortunately, it wasn't one of the fatal ones, because that's how Jennifer died.
That's true. And more ships have arrived, which is not good.
Well, it can't be too bad, because no beams have fallen on the bridge.
Oh, that's true.
That's usually when you know things are really bad.
And then the Jem'Hadar start beaming onto the Defiant and beating up Kira and Odo. Shields are down, and we begin to prepare to abandon ship when more Jem'Hadar arrive on the bridge. The Romulan shoots one, and Cisco beats the snot out of a couple of them, but it's not going well. And Kira ends up getting shot, and she goes down, and everything goes black.
I liked how when it went dark, you could hear there was like grunting and thudding in the background.
Right.
I think Odo was doing a number on the remaining Jem'Hadar.
I assume so. They didn't show that, but yeah, you had to believe that's what was going on.
Yeah. So the Romulan can't get the warp power back online. I have the feeling this is why you shouldn't have sent Miles and Dax down to the relay station.
Yeah.
Surely having either the science officer or the chief engineer would have been a good idea to keep on the ship.
Which is why they weren't really expendable. At the same time, you needed the two people most likely to get that data out, right?
Yeah.
So those probably were the two people most likely to do it, but they weren't expendable.
Yeah. You've got a ship that's still suffering from teething trouble and has a number of issues.
Yeah.
Why are you sending the chief engineer down?
Look, this is not a great plan. This is our first bad plan of season 3. We just really weren't prepared. But also, in addition to it not being a great plan, I mean, we took one shot and then we were almost destroyed. They were ready to abandon ship. What kind of warship is this? I guess because they're not using it as a warship, they're using it to hide. The hiding is what ultimately got them in trouble. But still, this seemed like an awfully fragile ship after all this.
Yeah, well, they haven't had Miles fix it yet.
Well, that's true. Maybe it will get better. Yeah.
Even then, they're going into enemy territory with shields that I think we've already established are pretty much useless. Remember, the Jem'Hadar were able to beam through their shields, able to walk through their containment field. We already know they have technology that renders most of what Starfleet has is useless.
And they knew kind of what happened to the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Of whatever that thing was that they were doing that allowed them to get through their shields. So, I mean, they had a bunch of warnings. They should have tried to do something to prepare for that instead of just, we'll get a cloak and we'll sneak in and find a way to talk to the founders.
We get a cloak that we're not sure actually works against them.
Yeah, I'm not sure this was a great idea. It's a very Deep Space Nine plan overall. Well, Kira comes to, and she's on a shuttlecraft with Odo. She asks what happened, and he says she was wounded. and he got them to the shuttlecraft. The last time he saw the Defiant, it was dead in space, surrounded by Jem'Hadar ships. That's all he knows.
He does seem a lot calmer now. He doesn't seem nearly as on edge.
That's true, but I don't know exactly how he got the shuttle away if they were surrounded by Jem'Hadar ships. This is very suspicious.
Yes.
Like maybe something happened that allowed him to get away. I don't know, but we don't know what happened after Kira got shot because it all went black and then she woke up here. She's pretty upset and asks where they are, and he says they're approaching the nebula, which annoys her, but also doesn't surprise her at this point.
Even then, she is still a supportive friend.
Of course.
I mean, initially she's annoyed, and then the next question is, found anything?
Yeah, she asks what he's found, and he's found a Class M planet with no star system. She calls it a rogue planet, which I'm not sure what that means or how it survives.
Yeah, it's actually a real phenomenon. It's the theory of planets that are outside of solar systems and are in the interstellar void.
Wouldn't they be completely pitch black dark?
Yes, and very, very, very cold.
Yeah, so I asked because we beamed down there, and Kira seems to be able to breathe just fine, and it is dark, but they can still see, and that just seems very suspicious to me with no star.
They're technologically advanced.
Yeah, I guess so.
Keeping it warm and providing low light.
Anyway, they are wandering around in this dark planet, and they find what looks like a lake of goo that resembles Odo when he's in his bucket. And out of the goo comes 3 figures that are just like Odo, all wearing orange, I don't know, like robes or dresses. I don't know how to describe them. And then a 4th one emerges who seems to be in charge and walks right up to Odo saying, "Welcome home." And it's to be continued. So dramatic. Wow. Okay. The end of the episode. How about some over-analysis? What do you have?
Well, my first point is related to the Defiant, my favorite Star Trek ship of all time. I think I mentioned that.
You did.
When Cisco's talking about the Defiant, he says it is overpowered and overgunned. Now, overpowered I can get, but overgunned in an age when you have recoilless weapons? I'm sorry, that isn't an issue. I don't think you can actually be overgunned when you have things like phasers and particle weapons. You just need a big enough power source. And that ship, as we discover later when Cisco mentions it, has an overly large power system. So I'm going to say, no way that's overgunned.
Well, but maybe that's just the problem, is that that power system actually ends up being kind of dangerous. Mm-hmm. And if that's the real problem, not that they have too many guns, but just that the power system required to make all those guns work is the danger.
That could be a good point, yeah.
I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't know. From my perspective, this is the first time I've seen the Defiant, like I said, outside of First Contact. And it seems to me like they got scanned once and then they were helpless. I don't know what kind of crap warship this is.
Like I said, Miles hasn't had time to work on it yet.
Well, I hope we fix that problem.
Okay, next thing. Did you think the changelings, Odo's people, did they take on that humanoid shape that roughly resembled Odo to make him more comfortable?
Well, I don't know anything about them at this point, but I assume so, yes. That they seemed to see Odo and they knew what he was.
Yeah.
And they also seem to know that he doesn't know what's going on. And so it would make sense that to make him comfortable, they would just appear to him in a comfortable form.
Because I assumed some of them could do human form better.
Yeah. Well, I question their need even to speak and to hear each other that way because they don't actually have ears. But, you know, somehow we have to know what's going on, so.
Yeah, if they did that today, they wouldn't actually speak and they'd just be subtitles.
True. I mean, they had a lot of possibilities. They didn't actually have to make somebody appear, but they did. Like Odo, I suppose, could have just touched the goo and he would have been a part of it. I don't know. I don't know how that works.
Odo had this sense of being called to it. So I'm wondering whether they were putting out some kind of signal, whether there was some kind of low-level subspace signal that was triggering him to find that nebula, or whether it was some implanted memory, perhaps?
Well, it could have been either of those things. When he first saw that nebula, I thought maybe he was having some kind of a flashback and remembering something that he had forgotten. That was my initial thought. And then later when he said that he was being drawn as if by instinct to something and he couldn't explain it, it made me wonder if they were doing something that was naturally attracting him. And that was perhaps making him so uncomfortable that was adding to his crankiness and his just level of discomfort.
Right.
But we get no info here about that, right? So we're just guessing that it could be one of those two things.
Yes. Okay.
But if I were Kira, I would be very afraid.
Yeah. Well, you don't know how it's going to go.
I'm on this rogue planet. I've got cranky Odo, who I barely understand at this point, his behavior. And now I have a whole bunch of them in front of me.
A whole lake of Odos.
It's like Krabby Odo Lake.
That would actually be a great name for a lake.
They should have called the episode that.
Yeah.
Odo Lake. That would have been a much better title.
Okay, I'll go with that. And my final one, the Defiant and Starfleet's response. Now, this is a little bit of a conundrum. Given the gravity of the situation, they're potentially facing an invasion from a very hostile and technically advanced race.
Right.
You'd think Starfleet would make a mass response, demonstrating they're not going to take this sitting down. You're threatening invasion, you send every available starship, everything you've got, and you do a huge show of force. And their response is, here's a slightly functional small ship with a ropey cloak and a grumpy Romulan. And by the way, don't go too fast, it'll tear itself apart.
No, I agree. This is a weird response. You would think they would be very concerned with the destruction of the Odyssey. Yeah. I suppose if we look at it, like if we jump ahead to the Picard time period of, the Picard series, we learn that there's so much bureaucracy with the admirals that sometimes they're frozen in their decision-making or they're too slow to make decisions, like any government. Mm-hmm. And if that could possibly be the case here, where, yes, the Odyssey was destroyed, but it did go into their territory. So if we just don't go in there, you know what I mean? Maybe it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I don't want to spend my money or my resources trying to go and protect that wormhole that's really just by Bajor. What do I care about Bajor? They're not even part of the Federation. So I could see some bureaucratic arguments going on that is not beneficial to this situation.
Okay, because that ties into my theory here.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering whether Starfleet and the Federation were pulling very much a piece of realpolitik here, which is the wormhole is a long way from the Federation space,
right,
but very close to the Cardassians. So if the Jem'Hadar and the Dominion come through, they'll have to fight the Cardassians first, which, in a practical sense, could destroy the Cardassian Empire, significantly weaken the Dominion's forces, after which the Federation could deal with what's left of the Dominion forces. Being extremely cynical, it would mean that DS9 would probably be destroyed almost immediately, and Bajor would be occupied again. But in a big picture, ignoring any moral obligations, it might make strategic sense to destroy the Cardassians and to fight the Dominion after they've won that war, or after it looks like you have a winner in that war.
Well, that's certainly one way to look at it. And I'm sure in a real government situation, there are people who are arguing that point.
Yeah.
Like there were people arguing about not spending resources to save the Romulans in Picard.
That's true. Yeah.
We were always sort of hesitant to do that in this time period of Star Trek. But I still have to believe that kind of stuff is going on.
I mean, that's taking a very cynical approach.
Well, it is, but if you look at how they've handled the Cardassian Treaty, you have to be cynical about the decisions that have been made.
That's true. It could also get rid of the Marquis.
Yeah.
Because the Marquis would be fighting the Dominion. Wow, that's just a win-win for the Federation.
Gosh, if you look at, I think in this time period, we see more stuff about history.
Yeah.
And if you look at it like America in its history being really hesitant to get involved in other people's wars, this could just be that. Well, that's not our war. If we just stay out of their territory, that's their problem. Or if they do come in, that's Bajor's problem. That's the Cardassians' problem. That's not our problem until it is our problem.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess if you're looking at it like that, that's a possibility too.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. Yeah, this is someone else's problem until it becomes our problem.
Yeah, the ostrich with your head in the ground kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But your butt straight up in the air, ready to be shot off.
Yep. Okay, well, that wraps it up for me. I mean, there's so many questions to be asked about this episode, but...
Well, it's only part one. I'm sure part two is going to answer some. And you must know some of the answers because you've seen this.
Do.
Although you said you didn't remember this episode.
This is one of those odd episodes where I remember the Defiant coming on the show.
Yeah.
And I remember Odo meeting his people, but everything else in between is kind of a blur.
Well, I can't say that anything else really memorable happened except for those two things.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of a good point.
That's more negative than I mean it to sound. I mean, in terms of something that you might remember in the long term from this episode, there are two things you would remember. And one is, for you, it would be the introduction of the Defiant. And then the second thing is going to be Odo meeting the people in the goo.
Right.
I can see how those are the two things that you would remember. And a lot of that stuff in the middle, like Odo being cranky and Quark talking to the forehead guy, I mean, that's not particularly memorable.
Right.
So I can see that. Yeah. Well, let's move to Women in the Future, which is going to merge into my leadership section as well. I'm not sure if the woman who came out of the goo is actually female or if that's just the way she appeared or she was just played by an actress. I don't know. So I don't have much to say about her or her compatriots at this point.
Strictly, they're completely genderless.
So I guess they're just they. Then I shouldn't say she. But anyway, I don't know anything about them. So I'm not gonna talk about it until we get more out of them. And there's not much else to say about Women in the Future because Dax and Kira were just performing their duties, which is great. Nobody harassed them. You know, those things are all good. The Romulan was played by an actress named Martha Hackett. And not only has she done voice work in several Star Trek video games, but she also played Seska on Voyager. I don't know if you recognized her.
Oh,
I thought she looked
really?
familiar. Yeah, I had to go and look her up. Anyway, she was a pretty good Romulan. I enjoyed her performance. You know, even though she didn't have a ton to do, I quite liked her as the Romulan.
She was a good villain, too.
As Seska, yeah. So
Yeah.
I appreciate the lack of complaints that I've had in the Women in the Future section lately. And maybe this will evolve a bit more over time, but I think that's all good. And I would rather not have to always spend time at the end of our discussions complaining about the terrible treatment and portrayal of women. So I'm very happy about that. But would still like to use this time to talk about the development of the female characters. But really not a lot of that happened in this episode. So I don't really have anything else to say here.
Yeah.
But we haven't had a leadership section for a while.
Yeah, it's time to bring back the leadership section.
So I want to talk a little bit about Cisco and Odo.
Yes.
You knew Odo wasn't going to be happy with that new guy, who, by the way, we never saw him again. But you knew it. And you should have told him about it privately and not surprised him in that moment. That was a critical error as a leader.
Yeah. Well, I think sneaking up on a station during a time of crisis and to test your cloak is a bad idea as well. So there's a couple of poor leadership choices here.
Well, yes, that's true. And truly, if he had been getting pressure for 2 years to replace Odo, he should have been having those conversations along the way with Odo because he may have been able to get Odo more on his side. You know, at the very least, this moment would have been easier if they had been having these conversations for 2 years instead of him just saying, well, I've been protecting you for 2 years. I was like, really?
Right.
At that point, I wouldn't even believe that, you know. But instead, if you had been working together and talking about it openly with a thing called radical candor, but if you'd been talking openly about this for 2 years, you maybe could have both just laughed at this moment and just gone, it's just another thing we have to deal with. No big deal. So I think that's a failure of leadership.
Yes, I would agree with that. The other side is if he'd had those conversations with Odo, maybe having regular evaluations and pointed out every time Starfleet wants to replace you, maybe you could have modified Odo's behavior so that he would have done the reports. He would have been more of a team player, perhaps. The other side of it, you could say, is they just wanted to replace him because the admirals, in their little checklist of rules that they follow, security on a station that has Starfleet personnel must be carried out by a Starfleet person. It doesn't matter what the practical effect is. It just, we have to follow the rules. So you end up with basically a job's worth kind of attitude coming from the admirals, which I don't think is good leadership either.
But you can complain all you want about the leaders who aren't there. You're there. You have control over that situation. And this is why you build relationships with people who work for you and work with you. You build a relationship with them and you show them that you're trustworthy. You show them that you're on the same side. It's not lip service. You work together. This thing where he's saying, they look at you as not a team player. Why do they look at him as not a team player? Because of reports that are getting back to them. Well, frickin' fix that. That's your job to fix that. I'm really disappointed in that because I think that that's a situation that Cisco should have taken control of as the leader in that organization. It's also really disappointing that this is the first time he's told Kira. Kira is the weapon he could have used to help him with this.
Oh, completely.
And he didn't even tell her. This is not great leadership here. At least what I have found in my life, that you show trust, you get trust, right? This is kind of how it works. And if he had been working harder to do this thing that I have been complaining about since the beginning, which is this lack of teamwork, if you build bonds between people, they will stand behind you. They will walk into fire with you. They will do all kinds of things for you. And you can solve so many more problems together than you can like this, where,
Well,
you just hope nobody upsets Odo. It's like, oh my gosh, come on.
Don't deal with the problem, just don't upset it. Yeah, that does not make a great work environment. The writers, I feel are kind of betraying Cisco a little bit to make a drama point.
I'm pretty sure the people who run this show have no idea how to be good team members. So maybe that's all I'll say about that. But I think there's an important lesson to be had here about better ways this could have been handled.
Yes, I think you're right.
Remember Alexis?
Right.
Alexis would have had a separate conversation with Odo.
Yeah.
She would have stepped out of the room. This would not have happened in front of everybody else. But, that's just that one moment in time. I'm actually talking about this 2 years of time. He had 2 years to be building a better relationship with Odo, and he didn't do it. And he should have.
Right.
And Kira.
Oh, yeah, I totally get what you mean. Okay, well, anything else for leadership?
No, I think that wraps up my women in the future and leadership, my combo section, 2 for 1.
Women leadership in the future.
Okay, then let's do rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
I am going to give this a thumbs up. Despite complaints and some issues with the episode, I still will give it a thumbs up.
Well, I also give it a thumbs up. I mean, thumbs down to Jedzya's hair and Odo's cranky attitude, but thumbs up to Odo's new outfit, and overall, it was a good start to the season.
Yes, I think it was a better continuation of the Jem'Hadar and Dominion storyline than the Griswold's camping trip.
Oh yeah, it was definitely better than that episode. Okay, well, I think that is it for Season 3, Episode 1. Come back next week for Episode 2. In the meantime, if you'd like to tell us your own overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, please email us at rebingeit@gmail.com or tweet us at rebingeit. Check us out on talkthroughmedia.com. You can leave feedback for us there on individual episodes, and you can also listen to all of the other awesome podcasts on our network.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinged Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.